Thank you all for joining us this morning as we continue our exploration of Shantideva's text, the Bodhisattva. Very happy to be here with all of you. So let's go ahead and take a moment to create a very intentional space for ourselves. So whatever business we've been up to all morning, whatever running around we've been doing, however many worldly activities have been occupying our mind, let's go ahead and put those to the side and really make sure that we are dedicated and intentional in our space, both our mental space and our conceptual space as well, right? Wherever you are in your home, whether you're in your living room or your office or your kitchen or your bedroom, whatever it may be, for the moment, create a sacred space, a spiritual space where you can focus on your practice. And we can do that together, letting all of our worldly activities, they wait outside. And as we do that, let's set a very strong motivation. Um, sorry, Deepti, do we need to record?
We already are recording.
Oh, we are. Okay, okay. Sorry. Let's set a very strong motivation that the reason we are coming together today to study this text, to study the teachings of the Buddha, is not merely for our own benefit, not merely to find calm or serenity or peace or relaxation in our lives, though those things might happen. We want our main goal, our primary goal of engaging with the teachings of the Buddha, to be our own achievement of Buddhahood, to perfect our minds in such a way that we can be of more benefit to other sentient beings. So, our goal is always to prioritize being of service to others and recognizing that the best way we can be of service to others in the long run is by working on our own mind, by taming our own mind, by developing peace and contentment and compassion in our lives, which then give us the tools and the stamina that allow us to be of service, developing both our wisdom and our compassion or our bodhicitta. Right? So, with that in mind, the reason we're studying today is not merely for our own benefit alone, but for the benefit of all sentient beings, so that we might develop our minds in such a way that we can be of maximum benefit to others. So, set that very strong motivation. And with that, we'll offer some preliminary prayers. So, we'll begin here with refuge and bodhicitta, which we'll offer 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue in Tibetan. Excuse me, in English with the others. Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pincher sangye drupar shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi Jola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok Sange Chidan Soki Chonam La Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyabsuchi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pincher Sange Drupar Shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now we'll offer a short mandala offering. We'll do this once in Tibetan and once in English. 사시프기 조익싱메도 트람리라블링시 니인데겜파디 사행게싱두 미테으아이 쫓긴 나만다 싱라 슈펄쇼 This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. We'll continue in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, Homage to the Dharma refuge. Homage to the great Sangha. To all three, ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies, as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. We will continue with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagwan was dwelling on mass of Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. And lastly, a prayer to avert obstacles. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis in the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamartha Shadara Samarya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara Samarya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara Samarya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara Samarya Pe, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. So thank you all for joining me this morning as we continue our study. As usual, you're free to ask questions at any point. If anything I say is confusing or you have some doubts about the verse or about whatever I'm talking about, feel free to ask a question. I probably won't see you if you raise your hand and I don't see the chat, so you can just interrupt me, and that's fine. If it can wait until the end, then we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So as we begin our study today, as we should always do whenever we begin a practice or a study, whether it be self-study or in a group, we want to adopt an attitude of an appropriate student, make sure that we cultivate the mindset that is appropriate for our engaging in Dharma. And so today, let's think of the three faults that we want to avoid using the metaphor of a broken or faulty pot. So we want to avoid being like a pot that is upside down, which is to say we want to avoid being closed-minded. No matter how much water you pour on a pot that's upside down, it'll never be filled. In the same way, when we approach any teaching, whether it be something new or something we've been studying for many, many years, we want to be open-minded and receptive to that teaching. We want to be, we can be critical, but we want to be generous with the way we engage in any teaching, right? So we want to avoid the fault of being like a pot that is upside down. And we want to avoid being like a pot that is cracked. So if a pot is cracked, then no matter how much water we pour into it, it'll all drain out, which is to say we want to avoid being mindless. We want to avoid being distracted. So we want to exert effort and attention to whatever it is we're studying, right? In this case, this class together with all of us. And then in addition to that, we want to avoid being like a pot that is stained, So if a pot is stained from whatever was being held in it before, then no matter how crystal clear the water is that you pour into it, that water will become stained as well and polluted. And in the same way, whenever we engage in a teaching or studying a teaching, we don't want to have any baggage. We don't want to have any preconceptions of what that teaching is going to be, whether it be due to preconceptions regarding the teaching itself or the author of the text or of the teacher or of the organization or the group that is leading the teaching. We want to leave all of our preconceptions out of our practice, right? And again, that doesn't mean don't be critical, but it means be open-minded and generous and first receive the teaching as it is given and then apply a critical eye to it. So we want to avoid these three faults and adopt the attitude of being open-minded, of being attentive, and of being receptive and non-prejudiced as we go about engaging in the study today. And so with that in mind, what I was thinking about when I was thinking of what I wanted to talk about this morning, one of the critical parts of our Dharma practice, right, that I talk about all the time is how do we make Dharma part of our everyday life, right? How can we make all of our activities spiritual activities or Dharma activities? This is critical, right? We talk about this all the time. And yet at the same time, how do we find balance between study and intensive practice and our everyday life? How do we make sure that we aren't burned out, that we aren't working too hard, right? Because there is a way, especially as we're new on the path, that we can push too hard and find ourselves repelled almost, like a magnet that's been turned around if we're not careful. So how do we find that balance between trying to bring Dharma into everything we do and not feeling overwhelmed or intimidated? They almost seem like contradictions. And so we need to find a way to balance those two, right? So finding balance in our life and allowing ourselves, especially as we're newcomers or beginners on the path, to have moments where we are not so fervently practicing, right? And to still have a mind that is trying to incorporate our understanding of the Dharma into everything we do. We can do those two things at the same time. That's part of the reason I encourage so often how to bring Dharma to our pop culture, or how to bring our Dharma practice to our everyday activities, not just to sitting on a cushion, but to going out with friends, to watching TV, to listening to music, to reading a book. How can I read a book, a fiction book, and use a Dharma mind, which still allow me the pleasure and enjoyment of reading that book, but also doesn't keep it distanced rather from my Dharma practice, from my spiritual seeking, right? How can I find that balance? I think that balance is really, really important, because if we don't have that balance, it's easy to become overwhelmed. At least I know in my experience. And if anyone has ever done a retreat, right, has done an extensive retreat, you might find that at the beginning of the retreat, you're very excited and it's very easy, and you've shut out the outside world. And then maybe a week into the retreat, you just are like, your skin is itching to do something that isn't meditate, right? Especially those of us that are new at it, because we are not used to putting that much effort into this one practice. And the building up our perseverance is important, but at the same time, we need to create the space for ourselves that we can go about practicing Dharma in a wholehearted way all the time. We never want it to feel like a burden. You know, if our Dharma practice ever feels like a burden, then we're going to turn away from it, right? So, how can we make Dharma critical to everything we do, and yet make it a joyful part of our life, not an obstacle, not something to overcome? Which is what it feels like sometimes when all you want to do is like relax on the couch and watch TV. And then you think, oh, how can I do this with a Dharma mind? It feels like Dharma is an obstacle to that, right? That's because we're so attracted to the pleasures of samsara that doing anything to turn away from those feels like an obstacle. So it's incumbent upon us to find that balance between bringing a Dharma mind, bringing a mind that says, how can I go about this activity with the mindset that I'm trying to be free from suffering? I'm trying not to be attached to external stimuli as if they're actual happiness. And I'm trying to develop my own meta awareness and cognition in such a way that I can be of more service to others. How can I bring that intentionality to my everyday life, whether it be watching TV, reading a book, listening to music, going to work, going to school, dealing with my children, whatever it may be? How can we do both of those things? We don't ever want to take a vacation away from Dharma, right? But that doesn't mean we have to be 100% focused all the time on the form of Dharma practice, because we need a balance. And even within that, as we practice Dharma, there's not one way to practice. In our practice, we have to balance. I often talk about the three aspects, right, of study, contemplation, and meditation. I say these are all three critical to how we engage in Dharma, right? When we are studying a new topic, whatever it may be, we have to first engage in learning about it. The word in Sanskrit and Tibetan is to hear, because that's how traditionally it's an oral tradition. But you study, you gain new information, and then you contemplate it, you analyze it, you see if it makes sense to you. You try to find places that it rubs against you the wrong way, and you try to develop conviction by understanding all of the details of it. And then once you have some conviction, you meditate on it to try to make it inseparable from your mind, to try to deepen your level of understanding. But we have to balance those three, right? We have to always be trying to do all three of them and not focus only on study. That's something we get criticized often here at the monastery, that we spend too much time studying and not enough time meditating. That's a lot of the criticism that the Gelug's get in general. They're said the Gelug's are all academics, but they don't know how to meditate. That's what a lot of people say, right? Because they don't really understand Tsongkhapa's position on what it means to study and what it means to meditate, and how those two things have to be constantly integrated all the time, right? To say that now I'm going to study and now I'm going to meditate is misunderstanding the nature of both study and meditation, right? That's what Tsongkhapa says. But it's easy to have that mindset. So we have to avoid that. And, I'm in a study program, as are the other monks I live with, and it's a long, extensive study program. It's easy. It's very easy to upset that balance and spend more time studying and not enough time integrating. So even though I say that this is a critique that other people give us because they don't quite understand, it also has some basis in reality, because not all the monks are good at balancing all those three aspects of their practice, right? Or not just monks, people in general, right? And in the same way, not only do we have to balance those, we have to balance other aspects of practice too. So study, contemplation, and meditation is especially how we move forward on our path. But at the same time, we also have to balance such things as prayer, and we have to balance meditation that is not focused on study or integrating new material, but just getting more in touch with our mind, right? And we have to balance service, doing good deeds, doing actions in the world. And those are all part of the spiritual path. So we can't just spend our time in the library as much as some of us like me would love to do, right? We have to balance engaging in prayer. We have to balance engaging in service work, whatever that may be. And then add that to our study, our contemplation, our meditation. And for those of us that need it, opportunities to relax as well. I always say that one of the most important things we can do as we develop our minds is have a relaxed attitude. If we're too tight, even about the Dharma, then we're going to be burnt out, right? So we have to find this balance. Prayer is such an important part of our practice. And as contemporary converts to Buddhism, often prayer isn't the first thing that people are drawn to. Many people that come to Buddhism come to it because of the philosophical outlook. And prayer doesn't always seem to line up with that for many people, at least when they get introduced. And I can understand that 100%. But I know from my practice and from what my teachers have taught that prayer is integral to my understanding of the Dharma. Because what prayer does, especially for me, is it allows me to connect to a tradition that is bigger than myself, to open my mind up in ways that allows me to receive the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to become receptive to the teachings that I'm trying to study. Right? So prayer is a practice of getting rid of my ego, getting rid of my self-cherishing, and aligning myself with the topics that I want to then deepen in my life. So prayer goes hand in hand with meditation, which goes hand in hand with study. And only doing one of them, it will be useful, be beneficial, but it's going to be partial in one way or another, right? I mean, even this morning at the monastery, we had a puja on the 16 arhats, and it was a 2-hour puja. So from 5:30 to 7:30 this morning, I was doing prayers with a few hundred other monks in the monastery, which is wonderful. It's not a puja we do very often either, so it was very nice to do, you know. And so being able to balance doing prayers like that, whether they're on your own or in a group, and then using those prayers to motivate you, to open up your mind, to make you receptive, and then engaging in meditation or in study, they work together. They work hand in hand, right? So we can't say that these are individual compartmentalized parts of my practice. We're trying to develop a holistic approach. And the best way to find that balance between practicing Dharma in every moment and not being overwhelmed and feeling like the Dharma is confining us, right, to having a relaxed attitude, is not compartmentalizing, but instead seeing how all of these things work together. Because the purpose of studying Dharma, right, I always say we need to bring the Mahayana motivation to everything we do. So our motivation, our practice is not merely for contentment in this life, but to learn how to benefit others, right? Yet, the reason we engage in spiritual practice in general, and not just Buddhists, anyone, is because we want to understand the world and be good people in the world and live a happy life. We want to lead and live a meaningful life, right? That's the point of engaging in any spiritual practice, is learning how to live a meaningful life. And as a Mahayana Buddhist, what that means is learning how to be of service to others, and in that service, develop my mind, developing contentment, developing peace, conviction in the path to Buddhahood. And as a result of that, I find joy and peace in my own life, right? Even though my life is dedicated to serving others, it's through that service that I find peace of mind. I find happiness. I find joy. I find the fuel I need to overcome any obstacles I experience. And that's the whole point. If my spiritual practice feels like a drag, if my spiritual practice feels like it's weighing me down and restricting me and not letting me do the things I want to do, then I'm not really thinking about spiritual practice in the right way. Because the whole point of it is to open us up, to make us more receptive to the world around us, and to make us more content in our own skin, right? To make us lead a more meaningful and more content life. So if you feel like your spiritual practice is weighing you down, then we need to readjust our understanding of practice. So we can't have a fixed, unforgiving kind of mindset. Now, we do need to practice with some urgency. Again, it sounds like a contradiction. When we study, we often study first death and impermanence and perfect human rebirth because we realize how incredibly fortunate we are to have the opportunity to engage in spiritual practice right now. We have the right set of conditions that allow us to engage in study and meditation, and we aren't promised that we're going to have those conditions in the future, even in the future in this life, never mind in future lives. So we have to make the most of those conditions while we have them. So there is an urgency to our practice. So again, we have to find a way to not ignore that urgency, but have a relaxed attitude that doesn't let us feel anxious or feel like we're letting someone down, right? So how can we do both of those things? And so having a holistic or a well-rounded practice helps us do that. It especially helps for me if I really focus on developing strong intention with all of my activities. Then, even when I'm doing things that are not on the outside looking like Dharma, I can recognize that at least I'm doing this for the reason. So, for instance, if I'm too stressed out from reading whatever it is I'm studying, and my brain can't interpret any more Tibetan language, and I need to just take a break, I might listen to music for 20 minutes, or I might read a book for 20 minutes. And so when I do that, I have the attitude, why am I doing this right now? Is it because I want to zone out? Because I'm tired of studying the Dharma? No, it's because I realize I need to refuel. I need to recover. I need to create space for myself that I can then be of more benefit to others, right? So even though I'm going about something that looks worldly on the outside, I'm doing it with the intention. I'm not doing this because I just want to uh, relax and hang out and zone out. I'm not doing this because I want to have a mindlessness. I'm doing this because I know I need to recharge my batteries. And this is one way I can do that. So it is giving me a brief respite from just the intellectual or emotional labor that I'm going into my studies. And I am using that opportunity to then allow myself the space to return to my studies refreshed, right? So if I can bring that intention to everything I do, then that helps assuage or decrease the sense of urgency because it means that everything I do is Dharma. And the beauty of having multiple parts of our practice, whether it be study, whether it be meditation, whether it be prayer, whether it be service, is that at any given point during our day, we can be doing one or the other. And as I say, they all are integrated because they all support each other. But there are moments in our day where one thing may be more appropriate than another, right? So when you first wake up in the morning, it may be very difficult to meditate or maybe very difficult to study. You don't have time, but you can offer prayers. And so then you can begin your day in that way. And then maybe in the middle of the day when you can take 5 minutes just to settle your mind and do a quick meditation to see what is my mind doing right now? How have I been going about my day? Has my attention been focused on benefiting others, or have I been caught up in worldly concerns? You can just take 5 minutes in the middle of the day to do that. And that brings Dharma practice to whatever it is you're doing. So there are different ways to incorporate Dharma into our everyday lives, right? There's not one way to do it. And so in our practice, I encourage everyone to try to find a balance, to adopt not just study and not just meditation, but study, meditation, prayer, and service, especially service. Um, the Buddha taught that there are kind of three worlds, three korlo, wheels of Dharma activity. And those three wheels are the wheel of study, the wheel of renunciation by means of meditating or contemplation, and the wheel of service through engaging in deeds, right? And so when you look at the way different people engage in Dharma practice, they may be focused more on study, or they may be focused more on meditating, or they may be focused more on service. And Kabji Lama's Rinpoche often would recognize that different students have different aptitudes. So some students, the way they practice most is through study, and so he encourages them to study. And others have a stronger aptitude for meditation, so he encourages them to go do long retreats. And there are others who really are focused on service, and so he encourages them to volunteer at centers or to help run centers or to do things like this. So there are different ways to engage in Dharma. And we don't have to do just one, but we may find that we have an aptitude for one more than another. And so we can allow that to be the focus of our practice without ignoring the others. And they're all valid ways to engage in a meaningful spiritual life that will propel us slowly closer to Buddhahood. So with that in mind, we don't want to let favoritism kind of influence our practice. It's easy to be like, well, I don't need to meditate because I really like reciting prayers. So I'm just going to recite prayers and I'm not ever going to meditate. Like, you don't want to do that. Okay. And the same way, you don't want to say, like, well, I don't really need to recite prayers because I like studying and I want to learn more information. So I'm just going to study and I'm just going to hang out in the library and not ever meditate because I don't need to, or not ever recite prayers. We don't want to let favoritism impact our practice, because we want our practice to be holistic. Yet we can say, well, this is the practice that I can do right now that'll actually motivate me to practice. So we want to lean into that. If I know that right now I have the option of reciting prayers or doing nothing because that's where my mind's at, well, then I should recite prayers. right? And the same with any of these topics. So we lean in to whatever gives us the most encouragement, but we don't neglect the other aspects as well. Because we always want to be moving forward on our Dharma practice. And that's going to change. The way we find balance in our life is going to change depending on our circumstances, depending on our level of practice, depending on what's going on around us. What I have as balance in my life as someone who lives at a monastery and is dedicated to the study program is going to be wildly different than the balance you have in your life due to whatever job you have or whatever your external circumstances are. Never mind our own levels of spiritual development, which also dictate a different balance, right? So it's not one thing. The balance you find in your life today is not going to be the same balance you find in a year from now or even a month from now, right? So it's something we're constantly negotiating. It's a constant negotiation. And the beauty of it, right? The beauty of it is that if we start all of our activities with bodhicitta, then here's the thing about bodhicitta, and this is important because we're studying Bodhisattva's way of life, which is all about how to live like a bodhisattva, which starts with bodhicitta, right? The mind that wishes to become a perfectly complete Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Bodhicitta, and like a text like this, which is showing how a bodhisattva lives their life, it's supposed to be aspirational, but it also can be intimidating because we realize how far away we are from the way a bodhisattva might live their life, right? We see some of the things that it says bodhisattva always engages in such and such an action. And we might say, oh, wow, I'm not there. Like that sounds crazy to me. How could I actually do that, right? So that line between being aspirational and inspirational, as well as intimidating, it's an interesting line. And the beauty of trying to practice bodhicitta is that when we do our best to practice it, we notice that line, that distinction between aspirational and intimidating, it gets farther and farther away. Which is to say that there's much less intimidation the more we practice, because the practice is self-reinforcing, right? So even if I know that I am not able to, let's say, give up my body to benefit a single sentient being, right? I know that I can't do that. I know I can't adopt that practice because I have too much attachment to my body and I'm not able to do it. Yet I know that that's the aspiration of bodhisattvas and of bodhisattvas who have reached a certain level. So I know I can't do that, but I can engage in some level of developing compassion and bodhicitta. The more I do that, the less far away that aspiration seems, the less crazy it seems, because I have a taste of bodhicitta, right? I have a taste of Dharma practice. So it's self-reinforcing. Those things that seem so totally mind-boggling and impossible seem much more within our grasp the more we practice. So we start our practice wherever we are, right? Our practice will meet the needs wherever we are in our lives. And then as we grow, our practice grows and our practice reinforces us. But it has to start with compassion and bodhicitta. It really does, because those are what are going to fuel us. Even if it doesn't come from reading a text like this, whatever way we practice, if we're doing work like, our Saturday classes on mind training, right? Even if we're doing that kind of introspective work, trying to get rid of the self-cherishing mind, it still has to start with compassion and bodhicitta, the wish for others to be free from suffering, and the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood so that we can relieve others' suffering. It has to start there, because that is going to create the framework through which all the rest of our practice can then exist, right? So even though bodhicitta can be intimidating, it's the remedy to that intimidation is practicing bodhicitta. That's the beauty of it. If we look at what deeds of a bodhisattva are and say those are so far away from my life, the way to get over that intimidation is to actually do the work, wherever level we are at, right? And have confidence that as we practice, we're going to move forward. It's not going to be overnight, right? We're not going to become bodhisattvas tomorrow or Buddhas next week, but we're going to be moving forward. We're going to be coming closer to our goals. And in the process of moving forward, we notice, at least I've noticed, and most individuals will notice, that the practice itself becomes joyful. The practice itself gives you inspiration. You don't sit down to meditate in the evening every day and say, oh, now I have to meditate for 20 minutes. You say, oh, excellent. I get a chance to meditate today. You don't notice a moment of anger arising when someone criticizes you and say, oh, I have to get rid of this anger because it's not appropriate. You say, oh my goodness, there's a moment of anger and I noticed it and I had the chance to subdue it before I acted on it. So it becomes a joyful part of your practice, not a part that feels restricting. You notice that when you actually engage in service to others, whether it be physical service or kind of mental or emotional service to others, that itself becomes joyful. And that all builds on itself. And in the process, you realize that your ego disappears or it gets smaller and smaller. And you're grasping on to external validation. You're grasping to external things as if they were going to bring you happiness. That gets less and less because you realize through your practice that your happiness is coming from your own mind, that you have all the resources you need to be happy all the time. That no matter what difficulties or obstacles you experience in your life, you have the internal resources to overcome them. And that realization comes in fits and starts, right? It comes in bits and pieces as you practice. The intellectual understanding can come right away when you read the texts and you develop confidence in them, but it's easy to hit speed bumps. Through our practice, as we develop our mind, as we're able to see more the inner workings of the afflictions and of the virtuous minds as well, then as we develop that experience, we have confidence that my happiness comes from me. I have the resources and the power to be content and happy and joyful all the time, regardless of the difficulties in the world. And once you develop conviction in that, it gets easier. You stop grasping at the outside world as if it's going to bring you happiness. And when pleasurable objects come your way, when you receive rewards or nice things, you appreciate them, you enjoy them, but they don't make up your happiness. They're just a condition that you allow to experience. You allow as an opportunity to experience happiness. The happiness itself is coming from your mind. So you stop prioritizing external things and you prioritize your internal life. And you do that naturally as your practice develops. As long as our practice is starting with compassion and bodhicitta, and it is holistic. So it's recognizing that it has to have a balance of study, meditation, prayer, and service, and other aspects too. These are kind of the main ones I can think of. I'm sure you can think of others. Our practice has to have all these different aspects depending to meet the different needs we have throughout the day. And that allows us to try to bring every one of our activities into contact with Dharma. And by doing that, we allow ourselves to be living a spiritual life all the time, but we don't feel overwhelmed by it. We don't feel intimidated by it because it becomes natural. It becomes instinctual. So with that, I thought we can continue our study of the text. Hopefully that was a little bit of a segue into this text. Because the text we're studying, right, by Shantideva, is what it means to live the life of a bodhisattva. It's literally called the Bodhicharya Vatara, the way of life of mind of enlightenment, right? Or of an enlightened one. And the section we're on now is talking about how to guard our mind, because that is how we protect ourselves from all of our suffering, is by guarding our mind. So we can look at this text into three categories, right? The first section is how to develop the mind of bodhicitta, which is the mind, again, that wishes to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings, to relieve them from suffering. The second section is then how to protect that mind of bodhicitta from degenerating, how to preserve it and make sure you don't lose it. And then the third section is how to increase your bodhicitta, to make it flourish, to make it stronger. So the first three chapters are going to be contained within that first section, the section of developing bodhicitta. The next three chapters are how to protect your bodhicitta and prevent it from declining. And then the final three chapters are how to increase it. And then the final chapter, of course, the 10th chapter, is a dedication chapter. So right now we're on the 5th chapter. So we're right in the middle of how to protect whatever bodhicitta we've accumulated or we've developed, how to protect it, make sure it doesn't decline. And so if we think about this in terms of the 6 perfected activities of a bodhisattva, the 6 paramitas, then we have the paramitas of generosity, morality, patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. Right? The perfection of morality was taught in chapters 2 and 3, especially in the teaching of the 7-limb prayer and the opportunity to make offerings as part of a 7-limb prayer. It was taught more implicitly; it wasn't explicitly taught. And the perfection of morality is taught across chapters 4 and 5, which is what we're in the middle of right now. The rest of the perfections each have their own chapter very explicitly. Chapter 6 is the chapter on patience, and so on. But the first two perfections are taught implicitly in other chapters. So chapter 4 was on conscientiousness, right? On being aware of our surroundings and how we're acting in the world around us. And then chapter 5 is on specifically on introspection or awareness and how to protect awareness and how our awareness itself becomes the tool we use to guard our mind. And so earlier in this chapter, we talked about how the mind itself is more dangerous than a wild, crazy elephant, right? Because a wild, crazy elephant can harm our physical body, can destroy our life now, but the wild elephant of our mind, if we don't tame it, will engage in non-virtuous actions that create heavy negative karma that doesn't ripen just as death in one lifetime, but as suffering over many, many lifetimes. So in that way, the mind itself is much more dangerous than an external wild elephant. So we need to tame the wild elephant of our mind. And the way we do that, especially as taught in this chapter, is through introspection and mindfulness, both, right? So mindfulness, in general, we say mindfulness is paying attention to an object, ideally a virtuous object. That's what we're trying to do here. But having your focus staying on a single object, whatever that object is, and not losing it. And then introspection or awareness is that mental factor that is watching your mindfulness to see if it has wavered, to see if you have been distracted. So the analogy they often give, and I mentioned this last time, is if our mind is a wild elephant, then whatever object we're focused on is like the pole in the center of the ring, of the training ring, and then the rope connecting the elephant to the pole is our mindfulness. That is keeping us tied to that object. And then the hook that we use to kind of poke the elephant when it's getting out of line or acting up, that is our introspection. So we need both of those. We need the hook and we need the rope. The rope keeps us contained and keeps us focused, and the hook is noticing when we are off track. And so earlier in this chapter, that was what our focus was. And we also looked at how introspection is not only the source of protecting our mind, but it's the source of all of our good qualities as well. So last week, we looked at different verses talking about how a mind of introspection is the basis for our generosity and is the basis for a mind of morality. And the mind of introspection is the basis for all of the 6 perfections as well. So that's what we were talking about last week. And now, continuing with that, we did get through these verses last week, verses 18, 19, and 20. But I thought I'd go over them again just very briefly, and then we'll continue on. So 18 through 20, it says, "This being so, I shall hold and guard my mind well. Without the discipline of guarding the mind, what are the use of many other disciplines? Just as I would be attentive and careful of a wound when amidst a bustling and uncontrolled crowd, so I should always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people. And if I am careful of a wound, though fear of it being slightly hurt, then why do I not guard the wound of my mind through fear of being crushed by the mountains of hell?" So what this is saying, right, is that if we don't guard our mind, then it's no use becoming excellent in any other type of activity, because if we don't have the proper intention, then any of our activities can go astray. We may be excellent at meditating, but if we're not meditating on virtuous objects, then that meditation isn't going to benefit us. We may be really great at memorizing texts, but if we're memorizing texts with the intention of showing off how great our memorization is, then it's not going to benefit us. We might have a really beautiful voice and be really good at chanting prayers, either by ourselves or in a group. But if we don't discipline our mind, guard our mind, then what's the point? How is that benefiting us? So we have to start with guarding our mind. And that is what serves as the basis to protect all of our other activities, to make sure our other activities are in line with our spiritual path, right? I am right when I was about to ordain, I ordained in January of 2012. I moved to Sarah in 2011, the end of 2011, because Kevji Lama Zopa Rinpoche told me to ordain with such and such a teacher. And I talked to him, and he said, "Come in October, and sometime I'll offer ordination." And I don't know when. So I got here right at the end of September, and he didn't end up offering ordination until January. And that December / the beginning of January, His Holiness Dalai Lama went to Bodh Gaya to give Kala Chakra initiation. So I was there, and with the monks from Sarah, and we were staying at the FPMT Center in Bodh Gaya, which is Root Institute. And so I was not yet ordained, but my ordination was less than a month away. So I was very focused on ordination and how important it was going to be to ordain. And Lama Zopa came to the center. And, whenever a high teacher arrives, you have a reception line. So we all lined up to greet Lama Zopa Rinpoche as he arrived. And the woman next to me, so he came down the line and he met her and he looked at her and he said, "Oh, didn't you used to be a nun? The one who did throat singing?" And she goes, "Oh, yes, I used to be a nun, but I gave that up, but I'm still doing throat singing and I've been practicing a lot and I've gotten a lot better." And he kind of laughed and he looked at her and he goes, "I think you were stronger when you were a nun." And then she said, she heard that. And what she heard was she must have been better at throat singing when she was a nun with this kind of chanting. And she goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. I'm much better now. I've been practicing." And he just laughed. He goes, "Ah, okay, okay, okay." And then he moved on. But what I heard, as someone who was so focused on my ordination, was you were stronger when you were a nun. Your ordination gave you strength, right? So in that way, the example of this is no matter how beautiful her voice was, if she wasn't guarding her mind, then what was the point of it? No matter how good at chanting she was, you know, if she was doing it for what reason, then it wasn't a meaningful practice. You need to focus on your mind first. Now, for me, I tell that story personally because we're always advised in the Lamrim tradition to listen to all of the scripture as if it were personal advice. And so when Lama Zopa Rinpoche said that, he wasn't speaking to me, but he still was speaking directly to me, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? He was talking to this nun, but when I heard him, what I heard him say was directly related to my experience of my planning to ordain. And it was encouraging me to look towards my ordination and realize how important it was in my life. So we can always listen to the teachings, whether they be from the mouths of our teachers or in the texts, and we take them as personal advice. That's an important thing to do. But here in this case, it's just showing that no matter how virtuous our practices may seem on the outside, if we don't guard our mind, then it's like throwing virtue into the wind and just hoping it lands somewhere beneficial, right? And the example they give in verses 19 and 20 is very simple to understand. If we hurt ourselves, if we have a wound, if we have a broken arm or something, and we go out into the middle of a crowded street or a crowded market, we're going to instinctually try to protect our arm because we don't want to incur more pain. We don't even think about it, right? You automatically curl into yourself if you have a hurt arm. You don't want people to bump into it. We don't think about it. If we do that instinctually, how come we don't also have the instinct to guard our mind? To realize that my mind is what's going to be able to be the greatest source of suffering if I'm not protecting, if I'm not protective of it. If I let myself engage in non-virtuous activity and I don't really pay attention to how I'm existing in the world, how come I'm not protecting that? If my instinct is to protect, a simple hurt on my body, then I should also be protecting my mind all the time in the same way. And the reason we don't have that instinct, I think, is because we still fear worldly loss more than we fear spiritual loss. We fear worldly pain more than we fear spiritual pain, quote unquote. I don't know if that's a good term, but you understand what I mean. We don't think of the fact we fear or are nervous about harms to our body in this life or losing things in this life, not having the things we need to continue leading a lifestyle that we hope to live. Losing any of those external things, whether it be physical things or external validation from our peers or from our bosses or from people we look up to, losing that is much more terrifying to us than slipping off the path. And that's because our minds of self-cherishing are so powerful that we value this life more than we value Buddhahood, right? So we need to realign our values and recognize that the values of this life and the benefits of this life are only useful if they are propelling us towards Buddhahood. That's the only reason we should have any attraction to the pleasures of this life, is because they help us move forward. Our real motivation and our real source of concern should be our spiritual practice. That's where we should put our energy and our focus. So,
Venerable,
yes.
So in the example that you told us, the one about the nun who, the lady who wasn't, so do you think Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche was saying that your prayers aren't worth much because you're not a nun.
No. I don't think he was saying that. I think all of our Dharma practice is beneficial, no matter what it may be. And I know what I heard him say. I don't know what her mind is, so I can't actually speak to her mind or to her intention. What I heard him saying was that the idea that giving up your ordination is not as consequential as you practicing chanting is a misunderstanding. And so she was more focused on how much she had improved as a chant master, and her ability to do this Tibetan style of throat chanting was her focus, whereas his focus was on giving up her life as a nun. So it's not to say that your chanting, your prayers, your Dharma practice in any way isn't meaningful. He wasn't saying that. He always encourages any Dharma practice, whatever form it may take. But he was saying that it's a shame that you no longer are living the life of an ordained person because you had the opportunity to live that life and you gave it up. And your focus is not on that, and it should be. That's what I heard him saying. But also, you have to keep in mind, I was preparing to ordain. So that was the advice I needed to hear at that moment. So maybe what she heard him say was different, you know? But I don't think he was criticizing and saying your prayers are worthless. I was just think he was emphasizing what a shame it is that you had the opportunity to live as an ordained person and you gave it up. It's a little bit, me bringing that example into this verse is a little bit of a stretch. My point in that was to show that I don't know her mind, right? I don't know anything about her mind. So she may be really great at guarding her mind, in which case her chanting and her prayers would be incredibly virtuous and beneficial. My point only was that no matter how good you are at doing the external work of Dharma activity, if you don't guard your mind, then that external work is not as meaningful. So that was my point in bringing it up. I don't believe Kabbalah Muslim was saying your prayers are useless. I don't think he was saying that at all. He always encourages
I
us to do.
understand. I understand now, except that she might have had her reasons for giving up her ordination. And maybe Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche probably knew her reasons because he clearly, I mean, they say, I haven't met him, but hearing everyone speak about him, he seemed to know stuff, right? So, so then it seemed like he was criticizing her, which is might have been a bit harsh for her. But of course, I don't know. I wasn't.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Again, what she heard him say and what I heard him say may have been very different, even though it was the same words. I took it as him giving her a little bit of a criticism, but he was also laughing and smiling while he did it, and that was what I heard. But you're right. He probably knew her situation much more. I'm not probably. He definitely knew her situation in a way that I didn't know, and who knows why she gave up her ordination? I don't know. In general, the teachings say that having ordination is such an incredible opportunity that there is very little reason to give it up that is beneficial, right? In very few circumstances where giving up ordination is the right decision if you have the opportunity to take ordination and your mind is fit for ordination. But no, I agree. I heard him criticizing her slightly, but I heard that also as inspiration to me as someone who was looking towards my ordination, that he was saying that to her, but he was speaking to me and encouraging me that taking ordination was the right choice, right? So
Right.
he's doing more than one thing at once, I
Right.
believe, right? And also,
Um,
I've seen Lama Zopa and I've seen His Holiness criticize people in public. They only do it when it is the most effective way to get a point across, you know? Like I've seen, excuse me, I didn't see, but I have heard of His Holiness Dalai Lama very recently, like since I just about I think the year before I came to India, so in 2010 or so, he was at a teaching, he was giving a teaching rather, and he was talking about Dogyal practice, Dorje Shugden practice. And he has said, look, I've already made it clear that all of my investigations, as well as the investigations of the 13th Dalai Lama and my study of the 5th Dalai Lama, shows that Dogyal or Dorje Shugden is not a Buddha and is not actually a protector spirit, but is actually a harmful spirit that is causing dissonance and harm to the Dharma. And therefore, anyone that considers themselves my student should not be engaging in this practice. I've already said this, I've made this clear, and yet there are some geshes on this stage who are still practicing. I know you are. And therefore, you should get up and leave now. And then a few geshes got up and left because he knew they were still practicing, but they were pretending not to, right? And so he called them out in front of a large audience because that was the most appropriate thing in that circumstance. Geshe Namdak told that story to me. So when calling someone out in front of others is an appropriate way to criticize them, then our lamas will do that. But that's not really for someone like me to do, because I don't have the skill of knowing when that's appropriate, you know. But for high lamas or highly realized beings, they know what is the most efficient way to give someone advice. And so maybe giving it in private or maybe giving it in public. You have to find the balance. I'm not able to do that, right? So when I give advice, I give personal advice. I'm not going to criticize someone in front of a whole group of people because I don't know if that's the most skillful way. But someone like His Holiness Dalai Lama or Kabbalah Lama Zopa Rinpoche, they see a much bigger picture than I do, right? So whether he was criticizing her to benefit her or to benefit me, I don't know. The point of this verse, though, as it relates to that, is we can fill our lives with the appearance of Dharma activity and never do a moment of Dharma. Now, I'm not saying that that woman was doing that, right? I don't know anything about her mind, but it's possible for us to do it. It's very possible for us to fill our lives with the appearance of Dharma. We may spend all of our time at a Dharma center. We may volunteer. We may be reciting prayers all the time. If we're not doing it with the right motivation, if we're not guarding our mind, then we're not making the best use of our time. Okay? Okay. Any other questions about that?
I have a question, but it's not about that. Is it okay, Saya?
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask. Yeah.
Yeah. So this line about I should always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people. Sometimes I'm confused whether what I'm doing is dharmic or not. Like sometimes if somebody is not like, especially being a woman, there are a lot of things that can happen, and sometimes when I'm showing my anger, it's for protection of me and the other person from doing something even more harmful. But in that moment, I don't know what I'm like. In that moment, I don't know whether what I'm doing is right or it's not according to the dharma. And I'm confused very sometimes only after many days I realize, oh, this is what I should have done better. So do you have
Yeah.
maybe some guidance on how I can make that happen process faster or
Well, I mean, the first step is, as you said, being reflective of the actions you've done previously. And so looking back and saying, oh, I acted in such a way, and then really think, what was my motivation? Was I doing it for a Dharma reason or for a reactionary emotional reason? So that's the first step, is realizing afterward, right? Because we spend our lives engaging in behavior that we don't ever think about. Most of the world don't second guess the things they do, right? They don't second guess when they're acting out of anger or out of lust or out of ignorance or any of these things. So the first step is to engage in an intentional practice where you look at your actions and you say, what was motivating that? Was I in control of that action and that emotion, or was that emotion controlling me? And so one of the ways to do that is just every day in the evening, take 10, 15 minutes as part of your meditation practice to analyze the major events of your day and see what was actually motivating this action. Was I doing it intentionally, or was I out of control in some way, right? And so that makes you more familiar with the act of looking at your motivation. And so at that point, it's still after the fact, right? You haven't brought it into the present moment, but you're creating a familiarity with looking at your intention. And then the more you do that, then you notice. So if you notice that most of your actions are actually coming out of anger or out of fear, and they're not in a Dharma, appropriate Dharma way, then once you notice that, you start noticing those emotions more quickly when they rise up and when they emerge. And so then when you start noticing them, then you can act on them in an appropriate way and not let them guide you. Now, as you mentioned in your example, there are times when you might be in physical danger and you have to act in some sort of wrathful or aggressive way in order to prevent yourself from being harmed, and also to prevent the other person from accumulating the negative karma of harming you, right? In those moments, when you've done the work, you can see, okay, I'm experiencing fear for my body right now. I'm experiencing fear for my physical well-being. So once you experience that, then you say, okay, am I going to act out of that fear? Am I going to act out of anger, wishing this person harm? Or am I going to recognize these two things? One, that if my physical body is harmed, is going to be a detriment to my spiritual practice, and therefore I don't want to have more obstacles than I need. And two, if this person harms me, they're going to be creating negative karma that is going to cause them more suffering. Because this person that is threatening me in some way, they themselves are suffering. That is why they're acting in this way. They don't understand that their actions are only going to cause harm. They think it's going to bring them happiness. And therefore, you develop a mind of compassion towards that other person. And out of that compassion, you act in an aggressive way. You act in a way that's threatening. You try to prevent them from engaging in harm. So externally, the actions may be very similar, but your motivation for it is not because you're worried about this body alone, but because you're worried about you don't want to cause them harm, and you don't want them to cause harm either. So your real worry isn't for you, it's for them. And by having compassion for them and the harm they cause themselves, then you act in an aggressive or threatening way. That helps prevent you or remove the imminent threat of physical danger, right? So that's what we have to work towards doing. It's very hard, especially when we're put into difficult external circumstances. So it's a practice. And the first step is at least analyzing our day and trying to see, was I acting out of fear? Was I acting in a reactionary way? Or was I acting out of compassion? Was I focused on my own self, my own pleasure? Or was I focused on, or my own safety, my own comfort? Or was I focused on the other person and preventing them from engaging in self-harm, right? And I say self-harm, what I mean by that is, if there's an enemy that hurts you in some way, right? What they're doing is creating negative karma. And as a result of creating negative karma, they are going to have to experience the results of that negative karma in the future. So that in that way, they're harming themselves. And so that's where our compassion should be focused, right? When they talk about the story of the Buddha in a past life as a Bodhisattva, when he was on a merchant vessel with 500 other or 499 other merchants, and then a pirate came, was going to kill all of them. Out of his compassion, he killed the pirate. But he killed the pirate not because he was not out of compassion for the 499 other merchants who were going to die. His compassion was for the pirate, because he knew that if the pirate engaged in that act of murder, he was going to be reborn in hell for so many eons that he was going to experience great suffering. So his compassion wasn't for the victims in that regard, it was for the perpetrator. And it was due to that compassion he was able to act without any anger, right? So we have to notice what our motivation is, and which is something that is not something we're used to. When we feel physically threatened or emotionally threatened, our first instinct is to, due to our self-cherishing mind and our focus on the pleasures and the insistence that this life's happiness is the most important, our instinct is to protect ourselves and only worry about ourselves alone. What a bodhisattva would do is worry about the other person, have compassion for the other person. The external action may be the exact same, but the motivation is different. Does that help? And it's not easy. So don't. It's
right.
easy to understand, but it's not easy to put into practice. It's something we do slowly, right? It's a process.
Venerable, I have a small doubt in relation to compassion. Like the compassion of ordinary beings like us. We see that as you say, there's a self-grasping mind, which is also having a self-cherishing attitude with it. So from the self-grasping mind, there's a perception of a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a compassion for a person, you see that person as a person. Isn't that self-grasping? And doesn't that lead to attachment to that person?
It can, but people exist, right? So when we say self-grasping, grasping at the truth, the truly existing person or the truly existing self, that's not to say that people don't exist. It's to say that they don't exist the way we perceive them. So when you grasp at someone, for instance, if someone is harming you, to say that this person is an enemy, the only way they exist is in a confrontational relationship with me. That is grasping at them and making a concrete idea of who they are and saying they truly exist as an enemy, as an external harm-causing force. And it's not allowing them the capacity to realize that that is our experience of them, but that is not their inherent nature, because they don't inherently exist that way. So that would be grasping at them. But if we say they're a person who's causing harm, I mean, people exist, like sentient beings exist, living beings exist. So to just recognize and identify them as a sentient being or a living being isn't grasping at them as truly existing in that way. So there's a little bit of a difference. Yeah.
Thank you.
Venerable.
Yeah.
Actually, in relation to what Priyanka had raised, I was reading about Hiri Ottappa. So, there is always this confusion about that, the whole spiritual path is about getting rid of our fear and guilt and shame. But this concept of a moral dread and moral shame, that there is still a fear that, of following the moral precepts of. So, I feel, is that the gray area where you still have fear and shame? So this concept of Hiriotapa I was reading about, but I'm still slightly confused about it. So would you be able to just advise whether how does that help to guard our mind in that sense?
So actually, if we keep going, there's encouragement to have a mind of fear and shame, literally, in a verse that's coming up. And so if we get to that verse, I'll talk to it then. Okay?
Okay.
That
Thanks.
that hypothetically is in the queue for today. We'll see how far I get. But the
Okay.
short version is that fear and shame and embarrassment, which also is part of that whole kind of cavalcade of emotions. What we understand shame and fear to be is they are ways of protecting our mind from engaging in non-virtue, right? And so what worldly experiences or worldly considerations of fear and shame and embarrassment aren't really what are meant by the Dharma meaning of those terms. And so I'll get into more detail with that when I get to those verses.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So let's move on to verse 21, considering 18 through 20 we actually did last week. So now we're actually finally moving forward a little bit. So 21 says, should I behave in such a way as this, then whether among harmful people or even in the midst of women, the steady effort to control myself will not decline. Now, again, we have to recognize that this was teaching that was given to a group of monks, right? That's important context. And so what this is saying is if I actually work to guard my mind and I prioritize, I recognize that my mind is like an open wound, which is to say that my mind can cause me great harm if I don't protect it, if I don't avoid non-virtue with effort. Then if I do that work of guarding my mind, then it doesn't matter what the external circumstances are. My mind will not be distressed. And so here it's pointing out the external circumstances as someone that wants to cause me harm, which would cause my mind to develop anger, or someone who I have physical attraction to, which would cause my mind to develop attachment or lust or desire, right? So the anger or the desire doesn't exist in the external person. It exists in my mind. And so for most monks, that is why it says in the midst of women, but you can take this to be any object of your desire, whether it's a woman or a man or a third gender person, anyone that may be the object of your desire. If you actually control your mind, then just being in the presence of those people won't cause you to immediately have the sense of lust or desire. Or anyone that could be an object of your anger, someone that causes you harm, being in the presence of them, if you're able to guard your mind, won't cause you immediately to have a sense of anger being generated, right? So by practicing the introspection, which allows us to guard our mind, then no matter the external obstacles we face, such as obstacles or individuals that under normal circumstances would arise our anger or our lust or desire, our mind is protected from those emotions, right? We have to remember, again, it's important that the lust or desire or attachment or anger or hatred don't exist in the external objects. They're in how we relate to them, right? That's the important thing. So you can't look at a group of people and saying, oh, you're an object of attachment and that's your fault. No, it's my fault that you're an object of attachment. It's my fault you're an object of my anger, right? So it's nothing about the external objects. It's about our own mind as we relate to those objects. And what this means, right, is that we need to develop conviction in what to adopt and what to abandon. These are the two terms you're going to hear again and again, especially talking about introspection, because introspection is watching our mindfulness and watching the other activities of our mind and seeing if it's on the right track. In order to do that, we have to know what are appropriate activities to adopt and what are appropriate activities to abandon, which is to say what are activities, both mental and physical activities, which is to say mental, physical, and verbal activities that are in line with virtue and which ones are in line with non-virtue. So what to adopt and what to abandon. And when we have conviction and understanding of that, then that mind that is able to analyze and say, oh, this action right now is one that should be abandoned, not adopted, and so forth, then that is how we protect our mind. And we can control our mind in a way that doesn't ever decline. But without that conviction, then it's very difficult to withstand external difficulties, because our experience of external difficulties is based on our understanding of what is an appropriate way to engage in virtuous behavior, what is appropriate dharma. So if I confuse the object of attachment with attachment, then I'm not understanding what's an appropriate way to relate to that person or that individual, right? So we need conviction that engaging in virtue we always should be engaging in virtue, and we should always be avoiding non-virtue. And we have to have conviction in recognizing that it's not the external objects that are the source of our difficulties, but it's the mind and the way it relates to those external objects. And through that conviction, then we can analyze our mind in a more meaningful way And by doing so, we can prevent ourselves from engaging in harmful activities. So now the next section, so these verses from 18 to 21 are how to make effort to guard the mind. That's the subcategory that is designated, right? How to actually make effort to guard the mind. Now, starting with 22, we say how to devote oneself to mindfulness as a way to guard the mind. So we've been talking about introspection, but generally, introspection and mindfulness go hand in hand. And when you're developing one, the other helps you develop the other at the same time because they work together. They're slightly different, but they work together. Okay. So the next verses are talking about how to devote oneself to mindfulness as a way to guard the mind. So it says, it is better to be without wealth, honor, body, and livelihood, and it is better to let other virtues deteriorate rather than ever let the virtues of the mind decline. Right? So what this means is, since all of our actions are preceded by an action of the mind, then this is what we have to focus on as most important. And it's the most valuable thing we can do. If we ever want to have virtuous activities of speech and body, we have to have virtuous mind preceding them. So if we're only focused on the external form and not on the mind that is motivating that form, then we're not really holding on to virtue. We may be accidentally falling into virtue, but we're not doing it in an intentional way. So the mind is most important. And by guarding our alertness or our introspection, what we use that, by developing introspection, we use that to guard our minds of renunciation and our mind of bodhicitta. So when it says, rather than ever let the virtues of the mind decline, what our introspection and our mindfulness allow us to do is to make sure our renunciation, which is to say the wish to be free from all the suffering of samsara, the cessation of grasping outside of ourselves as if that was our real happiness, our renunciation, and then our bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to benefit all sentient beings and to become a Buddha in order to free them from suffering. Those two things should never decline. And so if we're aware of our mind and how our mind is focused on virtue only, then we can make sure our bodhicitta and our mindfulness, our bodhicitta and our renunciation don't ever decline. So it says it's better to let other virtues deteriorate. That doesn't mean we shouldn't engage in virtuous activity, but it says that we should always focus on making sure renunciation and bodhicitta are the heart of our practice. And we should prioritize those and putting effort towards those before anything else, because all other virtues will come from those, right? If we have a mind of bodhicitta, then whatever activities we do are going to be mixed with that bodhicitta. So we need to prioritize those, and the other virtues will follow. If we had to choose between two things, we should always choose bodhicitta. And I imagine there are some circumstances where we have to choose due to whatever our environment or our situation is. I imagine you could probably posit some examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head. But so I imagine they do exist, that you could be in a situation where you have two different types of, you can uphold this virtue, or you can choose to ignore that virtuous activity and uphold bodhicitta instead. And if that is the case, if you find yourself in that circumstance, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I imagine they exist. Focus on bodhicitta, right? Don't let your mind deteriorate, even if it means not engaging in a physical action that may be virtuous. Oh, here's an example. If you have the opportunity to make an offering to someone, right? You have the physical means to do so, but you know that to do so will cause resentment to your mind, and maybe to them as well, but especially to you, for whatever reason. Then instead of making that physical offering, you should protect your mind and not allow yourself to generate the mind of resentment. It's more beneficial to protect your mind and not allow a mind of resentment or of regret to come in than it is to do the physical act of making an offering, if those are your options, right? So that could be one way where the virtue of generosity it might decline or deteriorate, but you're doing it at the expense of protecting your bodhicitta and not allowing yourself to develop a mind that prioritizes your own happiness and is resentful of another sentient being. Right.
Oh, but Venerable, what about making the offering and then working on your mind as well? Isn't that, I mean, I might realize
ideally,
that
yes.
I this offering is a good one to make, or this person needs it, and I can see that I don't like to do it, but I can choose to be the better person and do it. And also, that's where awareness comes in, right?
No, 100%. That's the best option, right? But not everyone may be there. You may know, so that's
No,
the ideal
but I
situation.
still am falling prey to resentment. I can see that. I mean, I'm not going to lie to myself. This is very personal because I have done stuff like this.
I understand.
So,
Yeah.
but I have done it knowing that I'm not liking it, and yet choosing to do it because I know that it's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
So then, have I made a wrong choice? Would it have been better to say, well, sorry, can't give, and not
No.
felt
I think
resentful?
no. I think that if you can recognize that at the moment and then use that as an opportunity to develop your own mind, then that's the best. You get the best of both worlds. You recognize your own mind, you're actively working against the selfish minds, and you're making the offering at the same time. So that's the best. But not everyone is able to do that. Right? Not everyone has that level of practice or that level of reflexivity where that is the space they're in. So if you're able to do that, then yes, that's best. Like I said, it's hard for me off the top of my head to think of an opportunity where you have to let one virtue to deteriorate in order to protect another one. And so that's just one possible example. That may not be an example that resonates with you. Okay. So, because I think what you're suggesting is the best course of action. I just don't know that it's available to everyone, depending on their circumstances and their level of practice. Um, but yes, if you can do that, that's best. To do the offering, to do the external virtuous activity, and then watch your mind and use it as an opportunity to overcome your self-cherishing instead of letting the self-cherishing take control. That's the best. But, not everyone can do it like that.
Okay, thank you.
um, if everyone could do, we'd be a lot happier place. If everyone had that level of reflexivity, then the world would be a lot easier to live in. If people were constantly watching themselves,
Yeah, well,
myself
I
included.
suppose one can do it sometimes, and at other times one doesn't. So yeah.
Yeah. We do the best we can, so we have to see what our resources are, but I mean, like, our internal resources, and do the best we can with whatever resources we have. Sometimes that means this is an opportunity for me to really work on my self-cherishing mind, and sometimes that means I know that I'm not going to be able to do that now because of whatever resentment I have or whatever, and so therefore I'm going to have to choose another option, do the best I can with whatever resources I have available at the moment. um, if we were to continue, let's see, because this section continues. O you who wish to guard your mind, I beseech you with folded hands, always exert yourselves to guard mindfulness and alertness. So this is the heart of this section, right? It's saying the chapter, or the subsection is how to devote oneself to mindfulness as a way to guard the mind. So what Shantideva is directly appealing to the listener and saying, if you want to guard your mind, we've already talked about how beneficial it is to guard the mind, how guarding the mind is like taming the wild elephant. It's the most important thing you can do. It allows all of your actions to be in line with virtue. How important it is to guard your mind. If you want to do that, the way you do it is by exerting yourself towards mindfulness and alertness, right? So mindfulness is, in general, mindfulness is being aware of whatever object you choose to focus on, right? And not allowing yourself to forget that object. Here, if we look at the commentary by Togme Zampo, he says mindfulness is being mindful of what to adopt and what to abandon, being mindful of what is virtue and what is non-virtue, and how your mind relates to both of those things, right? So it's not just focusing on a single object like you do when you're engaged in developing mindfulness and meditation, where you're focusing on a meditative object. Here, it's mindfulness of what is the appropriate type of behavior and mindfulness of what is inappropriate. And then your introspection or your alertness is then applying yourself to always follow the appropriate behavior, right? So a lack of mindfulness is not paying attention if this is an action that I should adopt or an action I should abandon. Like, a lack of mindfulness is just forgetting that I need to pay attention to virtue and non-virtue. So once you have that mindfulness, you then still have to choose to pursue virtue, right? I may know something is virtuous or non-virtuous and choose to go the non-virtuous route. So the introspection is then pushing me towards virtue. It's looking at my options and saying, now that your mindfulness, it has identified what is virtue, what is non-virtue, what is to be adopted, what is to be abandoned. Now I'm making sure that my actions are aligned with virtue. And by doing that, that is how you guard your mind. By constantly allowing your mind to focus on virtue, to be mindful of virtue, to not forget virtue, and then to have the small mental factor that's always analyzing and saying, now that you've identified what virtue is, are your actions in line with that? Or are they counter that in some way? You know, both Gyalten and Tokme Zampo, in their commentaries on this text, they point out, those are the two major commentaries in the Gaelic tradition, though there are others as well. They both point out that if you are ever separated from mindfulness and introspection, or mindfulness and awareness, then it is impossible to guard your mind, because those are what you need to guard your mind, right? Now, we had conscientiousness in the last chapter. That is being aware of your surroundings. You do need that as well. But more important to actually guard your mind is to look at your mind itself. That's what introspection is doing. And if you don't have that mindfulness that is focused on virtue, then it doesn't really matter if you're watching your own mind, because you could just watch it go in the wrong direction, right? So you need both of those things. You need the mindfulness that is helping you stay tied with the rope of mindfulness tied to virtuous activity and the concept of virtue, what it is you need to adopt. And then your introspection is actually analyzing your actions, your mental actions, most importantly, and saying, are my actions in line with this virtuous object, this virtuous intention that I have tied myself to? So that is how we protect our mind, is by developing mindfulness and introspection. And so the beauty of that is the most simple meditation that we learn, right? Placement meditation, following our breath, teaches us how to develop mindfulness and introspection, because those are the key antidotes to developing single-pointed concentration. We talked about this last week, right? To develop single-pointed concentration, there are 5 main obstacles, and there are 8 antidotes to those 5 obstacles. The first obstacle is simply laziness, and there are 4 antidotes to that involve faith, and then effort, and then faith, conviction, effort, and pliancy. But then you have the obstacle of forgetting the object of your meditation, and the antidote to that is remembering the object, which is to say mindfulness. And then you have the obstacle of lethargy and alertness. So your mind is either sinking and getting sleepy and losing concentration, or it's bouncing off all the walls and it's too excited or agitated. And the antidote to that is awareness or introspection. So mindfulness and introspection are these critical antidotes that we need to develop in order to develop single-pointed concentration, regardless of the object you're meditating on. So if you just do 10 minutes every day focusing on your breath, right? That itself is a neutral activity. It's not even a Buddhist meditation necessarily, right? Non-Buddhists can develop single-pointed concentration. If all you're doing is that, you're still developing your capacity for mindfulness and your capacity for introspection. So now what this text is saying is, once you do that work, you've developed mindfulness and introspection. Let's point them in the right direction. Now that you've done that neutral work of developing mindfulness and introspection, because those are just neutral attributes, right? It depends on what they're focused on, if they become virtuous or not. Mindfulness and introspection have no inherent virtuous or non-virtuous quality. It depends on where you're focusing them. Now that you use a simple meditation, the first meditation we teach anyone, now that you've used that meditation to strengthen your mindfulness and your introspection, now you can use them in a meaningful way to protect your mind, to make sure your mind is always aligned with virtue. And by doing that, all of your activities become virtuous. And as I was saying in the beginning of our discussion today, then all of your activities become Dharma activities. It doesn't matter what your activities are doing. If you allow your mindfulness and your alertness to always be developed, your mindfulness is always focusing on what to adopt, what to abandon, and your alertness or your introspection is looking at your mind and saying, am I following the path of virtue or non-virtue? If those are always active, then your external activities become Dharma activities, if you're following a virtuous activity or a virtuous path, right? So these are 2 critical qualities to develop, mindfulness and introspection, but they're also really easy to develop. You know, it's the very first meditation that we learn how to do. And by developing single-pointed concentration, you are using mindfulness and introspection and increasing their capacity. And now you have the opportunity to take those tools you've developed and use them towards virtue, towards Buddhahood, you know? So we need them, though, if we want to be on guard from who are we protecting ourselves from? We're not protecting ourselves from external enemies. We're protecting ourselves from the afflicted minds. Those are our real enemies. That's the reason that having these internal tools of mindfulness and introspection are so important, because the real enemies we need to protect ourselves from are our afflictive minds, right? Whether that be our attachment and our anger and our ignorance, or any of the secondary afflictive minds, our jealousy or our pride or our lethargy, any of these things. The way we protect ourselves from those real enemies is having a mind that is constantly looking at itself and saying, am I allowing these afflictions to overwhelm me? Am I allowing these reactionary emotions to guide my behavior, or am I in control of my emotions? As long as we are on the path and beginners on the path, we're not going to subdue all of our negative emotions right away. But what we can do is notice them. We can recognize them, and we cannot give them power over our lives. We recognize them. We recognize I haven't eliminated desire. I haven't eliminated attachment. I haven't eliminated anger or hatred, right? But when I feel that emotion coming and emerging, instead of allowing myself to act on it, I choose to act on its opposite. I choose to act in such a way that aligns myself with virtue and protect myself from the real enemy, which is not external to me, but is my own negative minds, whether it be a mind of any of the afflictions. And so these are critical tools to do that. This is how we do that work of looking at our own minds, is using mindfulness and introspection. So here, Shantideva is literally appealing to his audience and saying, I beseech you, with folded hands, please watch your mindfulness and your alertness. That is how you protect yourself. That is how you actually develop spiritual longevity and strength and power, right? He goes on in these next verses to explain how to make your actions more forceful and how to make your wisdom and your ethical behavior more pure, right? So he says, people who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything useful. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome. Whatever has been learnt, contemplated, and meditated upon by those whose minds lack alertness, just like water in a leaking vase, will not be retained in their memory. Even those who have much learning, faith, and willing perseverance will become defiled by a moral downfall due to the mistake of lacking alertness, right? So what he's talking about here is that our actions are impotent if they aren't given proper motivation. So the first verse, verse 24, people who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything useful. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome. That is showing that if we don't guard our minds, our actions have very little force, have very little power. So if we want to develop spiritual power, we need to have alertness. We have to guard our minds. And now, again, this is a little bit of hyperbole, right? If your minds are disturbed by confusion, we still have some capacity to do virtue, right? We know that people do virtue accidentally all the time, but it's never as powerful if it's done intentionally and it's done with the full force of recognition that this is a virtuous activity that is leading me towards Buddhahood. I'm doing it so I can become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So everything becomes more powerful when it has the right motivation, right? And again, people who have sickness, physical sickness, might have some strength. This is a hyperbole used as an example. So don't get too caught up on the specifics of it as much as the example, right? And you can recognize that when you're sick, yes, you can do some things, but really, especially if you're running a fever, you don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to go do anything. You don't want to do your chores. You don't want to even, comb your hair or take a shower or anything, because you just want to lay in bed and not move, right? And in the same way, if you haven't done the work to actually look at your mind, so your mind is overwhelmed by confusion, then it's going to be very hard to engage in virtuous activity. And so then the next verse tells us that how our wisdom doesn't become pure if we don't have mindfulness and alertness. So whatever we've learned, contemplated, and meditated on, right? So these are the three things I say we should do all the time: study, contemplate, and meditate, or learn, contemplate, and meditate. No matter what we've learned, contemplated, and meditated on, if our mind doesn't have alertness, then just like a water in a leaking vase, we won't keep any of it. We'll have no retention. Right? So our wisdom itself won't become pure. Our wisdom is muddled. Our wisdom becomes like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. It doesn't actually uphold its object. And then the last verse of these three is saying that our ethical behavior also becomes or doesn't become pure if we don't have alertness. So even if we've studied a lot, even if we've done a lot of learning, even if we have conviction in the teachings of the Buddha, we have faith in our gurus, and we exert effort and perseverance, we still will fall into unethical behavior if we don't have the alertness that's watching our mind and making sure that we are always focused on virtue. So having mindfulness, which is to say mindfulness of virtuous activity and mindfulness of what is appropriate behavior to adopt and appropriate behavior to abandon, having that mindfulness and then having the introspection that is checking our actions of body, speech, and mind and making sure they're in line with virtue are necessary if we want to develop spiritual power, if we want to make sure that our wisdom is actually pure and has some fortitude, and we want to make sure that our ethical behavior stays in line with Dharma. Now, what I like about these verses as well, verses 24 through 26, is they remind me of the three attitudes that we talked about at the beginning of our class today, right? So we say we want to avoid being like a pot that is upside down. So in the same way, we want to avoid being like someone who is overwhelmed by confusion and not able to actually receive the information and the teachings, right? So this verse 24 reminds me of trying to avoid being like a pot that's upside down and showing how introspection and mindfulness can help us avoid being small-minded, being closed-minded, and instead open ourselves up to have more potency. And then this one very clearly says we don't want to be like a pot that's leaking, right? So that's the second of the two characteristics that we try to avoid that I mentioned at the beginning of class. So having alertness and mindfulness makes sure that we actually are able to practice a type of attention and not be distracted. So whatever we learn, we hold it in our minds and we retain it in a meaningful way. And then lastly, we want to maintain our ethical behavior. Then that's like avoiding being like a pot that is stained, right? So we said that if we come in with prejudice or we come in without being aware of all the baggage we're carrying, then even our best, what look like the best of actions can become stained with these negative minds. So if we have alertness and mindfulness, that helps prevent that. So I like that these verses, 24 through 26, parallel the three qualities of a student that we talked about at the beginning of class today. Okay. So if we want to continue, verses 27 and 28. The thieves of unalertness. I'm not really sure if that's a word. In Tibetan, you can make any word a negative just by adding the negative particle, either before it or after it. And sometimes when you try to put that into English, you get some very strange words. So I'm not sure if unalertness is a word, but we get where it's pointing at, right? The thieves of unalertness, in falling upon the decline of mindfulness, will steal even the merits I have firmly gathered, so that I shall then proceed to the lower realms. This host of thieves, who are my own disturbing conceptions, will search for a good opportunity. Having found it, they will steal my virtue and destroy the attainment of life in a happy realm. So what this is showing is, going off of the last three we just discussed, how having mindfulness and alertness will strengthen our practice, and it will ensure that our wisdom is pure and that our ethical behavior is pure. If we lack those, if we lack mindfulness and alertness, that is, then our virtues that we have accumulated, they will be destroyed. And any virtues that we have not yet accumulated, but we hope to accumulate, will never come about. We need mindfulness and alertness both to protect the virtue that we've already accumulated, including the merit, but also the good qualities that we have. And if we want to continue developing more merit and greater strength in our good qualities in the future, then we also need mindfulness and alertness. So it not only protects what we've already developed, but it ensures that we develop more in the future. And so lacking them, then we lose our virtue. We lose our merit. We lose the opportunity to develop more merit in the future and more virtue in the future. So not only is it protective, but it's supportive at the same time, right? It protects what we've already done, and it supports us doing more in the future. So
Oh,
here it's calling,
Venerable,
yeah,
how do merits which we have already gathered get destroyed by lack
a
of,
lack of these.
yeah? Because we've done them.
That's true. But if we've accumulated merit, they say that in the next chapter, Shantideva says very clearly, a single moment of anger towards a bodhisattva destroys countless eons of merit. So developing anger towards holy beings or holy objects is one way that we destroy merit we've accumulated. And so in the same way, we talk about when we create negative karma and we do purification practices to help destroy that negative karma so it won't ripen. We can do the same thing with our positive karma as well if we're not careful. And now by dedicating that karma, by dedicating that merit at the end of our practice, we think of dedication as a way to safeguard our merit. So generally, once we've done a proper dedication, we've accumulated any sort of merit, and then we dedicate it to other sentient beings. That kind of is like safeguarding it. So we can't destroy it. It's like putting it in the bank, is the analogy I've heard. But if we don't dedicate it properly, then, or we've collected merit in the past that we haven't dedicated properly, and we develop harmful attitudes towards others, that destroys our merit. It doesn't, not only towards a bodhisattva, this having anger towards anyone will destroy merit, but the more virtuous the object of your anger is, then the more merit you destroy, right? Or have the potential to destroy. So that's the reason mindfulness and alertness help you, is because mindfulness and alertness, if you have them, you don't generate anger, right? Or you don't allow your negative minds to overwhelm you. So that is how they're beneficial. Here it's saying, what are the thieves? Lacking alertness, lacking introspection is like a thief, right? And the way it's like a thief is because it steals all of these things we've accumulated. And the way it steals them, it's kind of like having an inside man, right? So it's like having the security guard leave all the doors unlocked and turn off the alarm system. So then all of the other afflictive minds can come in and do the dirty work. So lacking alertness and mindfulness is like leaving all your doors unlocked, leaving your windows open, and turning off the alarm system. And then all of your other negative minds, whether it be anger, resentment, jealousy, attachment, whatever it may be, they can come in and no one's watching for them, But if you have mindfulness and alertness, then when any of those negative afflictive minds start showing their face, you can do something to prevent them from becoming, full-blown attitudes. You can prevent yourself from acting on those negative minds. So that is how lacking these causes your virtues to be destroyed. And in the same way going forward, so not only do you then have the potential to destroy any virtuous minds or any merit you've accumulated already, but you're not going to then pursue virtue if you aren't constantly recognizing this is virtuous and this is non-virtuous with mindfulness. And if you're not using awareness to then align your activities with virtue, making sure your activities have the virtuous intention. If you don't have them in the future, then you're not going to collect any additional merit or any additional virtuous qualities. So that's how these work. Right? So that's why it's called a thief of unalertness, but also it's the host of thieves who are my own disturbing conceptions. So again, our real enemies here are not external thieves who are going to come steal our worldly possessions, but they are the disturbing emotions, our afflictive minds, that are the internal thieves that are going to steal our spiritual possessions, which is to say, they're going to steal our peace of mind, they're going to steal our good motivation, they're going to steal our merit, because they encourage us to, all of our afflictive minds, encourage us or lead us towards non-virtue. And so, if we want to not fall those afflictive minds, we have to be aware of them as they arise, and that is where mindfulness and introspection come in. They protect our mind from those thieves. It's like a security system.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Venerable, I have a question.
Okay. Yeah.
This constant work on gathering merits, virtue for myself, very much. Isn't it not self-cherishing?
So it depends on what your motivation is, right? This goes for most of our activity that we do. So the reason I'm gathering merit is because I recognize that to become a Buddha, I need to engage, I have to complete the two collections. One is of merit and one is of wisdom. right? And so what it means to gather merit is to engage in behavior that is virtuous. And so if I'm only doing that because I want to experience bliss in this life, then I'm not actually engaging in a Dharma practice, right? If my intention is worldly happiness only, then that's not a Dharma practice. If I'm engaging in merit, if I'm engaging in virtuous activity, but my intention is I want to have a positive rebirth, and that is at least a Dharma practice, but it is the smallest type of motivation. It's not a Mahayana motivation. It's the least type of motivation we can talk about. We call it a small scope motivation. If I'm engaging in virtuous activity and thereby accumulating merit with the intention that I want myself to be free from suffering, then that is again a Buddhist motivation, but it's a medium scope motivation. It's only focused on oneself alone, not on other sentient beings. But if I'm accumulating merit and I'm thinking of my merit specifically as going to be the fuel that helps me achieve greater realizations so I can become a Buddha, so I can serve others, then that becomes a Mahayana motivation. And so my pursuit of merit isn't because I want to be popular. It isn't because I want to have happiness in this life. It isn't because I want fame or pleasure or wealth. It's because I want the real wealth, the unending wealth of Buddhahood. I want to achieve Buddhahood so I can be of service to others. And in that way, seeking out merit, trying to accumulate merit, doesn't become self-cherishing, and it doesn't become grasping in any way. If you're only doing it because you want to show off how good you are, then it's definitely self-cherishing. So you have to look at your motivation in that way. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. You know, a lot of in these chapters especially, it's a very fine line between not seeking out or making sure that your actions allow you to be respectable within society, which allow others to have confidence in you and to follow your advice, and not wanting to have fame. Like those two things seem like the same thing, right? And not wanting to be praised by others. So especially as someone who shares Dharma instruction, right? Wanting to be respectful in such a way that people can listen to what I say and have some confidence that I know what I'm talking about, that I've done the work to some extent, that I've studied, I've meditated, I've put in the time and effort, and I have some understanding of Dharma. I want people to see that in me, because by seeing that, it makes me more effective as a teacher, right? But at the same time, if that can very easily be like, I want to be famous, I want people to like me, I want people to praise me and say what a good teacher I am. So you have to be very careful, right? Because externally, the result may be the same thing, but what am I attached to? That is what we have to watch out for. And it's the same with even engaging in virtue. Am I going to go make these offerings because I really genuinely want to help these suffering sentient beings, or because I want people to see me making these offerings and think of how magnanimous I am, right? Like, what is my motivation? Am I going to get a promote? Am I going to work really hard to try to get a promotion at my job because I want people to say what a good worker he is and to praise me and to think that, you know, I'm deserving of their respect? Or am I going to do it because I realize that if I have a different position at my job, it'll give me more resources that I can use in a more efficient way to serve others? So we always have to watch our self-cherishing minds and to see if the self-cherishing mind is infiltrating our motivation. And even when we're doing, like I said, the external activities may all look like Dharma, but if the mind is not, if the mind is motivated by self-cherishing, then it's a worldly activity, right? So that's why we have to focus on protecting the mind. And that's where mindfulness and alertness come in, because they're always focused on our own mind in that way. What time? We have a little bit of time for a few more verses. So this next section, you know, I'm not giving you all of the outline, because there's a point right now where every single verse has its own outline header, you know. We're encouraged, and I encourage people in general, to memorize the outlines of texts, because by memorizing the outline, you understand how all the pieces of the text fit together, and it also is an easy way to just remember where you are in a text, right? So we're very often encouraged to memorize and to study the Lamrim outlines, but any text here at the monastery that we study, the first thing we do is learn the outline. So when I go to debate tonight, I might quote something from my text that we're studying, And the first thing I'll ask them is, what outline does that fall under? And once they can name that outline, I'll say, oh, what are the other outlines, levels that are parallel to that? What is that nested under? What is that nested under? And you go all the way back to the very beginning of the text, and you might have like dozens and dozens of nested outlines. So understanding the outline is very useful, right? To understand the context. But I'm only giving us some of the outlines because literally at this section, every verse has its own outline. And so it's not quite as useful because you're just memorizing every single verse. I was studying and teaching a commentary on this text in preparation for this, and the teacher recommended that the students all memorize Shantideva's text. And he said, yes, it's 900 verses, but if you memorize one verse a day, then over 5 years, you'd have the whole thing memorized. So you should just do it like that. And I said, good luck. You know, I have friends that have memorized this whole text, but it's not me. My memorization isn't quite there. But so the outline for this section is how to guard your mindfulness as a method of guarding your introspection. So that's starting with verse 29. I won't give you the sub outlines, but that's where we are now. So we just finished the section that was talking about how we devote ourselves to mindfulness as a way to guard the mind. And now we're talking about how to guard mindfulness as a way to guard introspection, because the two work hand in hand. Okay? Really, these are reinforcing the verses that came beforehand. Of all the verses of all the chapters, this one has a lot of very self-explanatory verses. So at verse 29, we say, therefore, right? So we just talked about how if we don't have alertness, we don't have mindfulness, then those are like the thieves. The thieves of our afflictive minds can come in and steal all of our virtue, steal all of our good qualities if we don't have them. So when we recognize that, we say, therefore, I shall never let my mindfulness depart from the doorway of my mind, because if that mindfulness goes, I shall recall the misery of the lower realms and firmly reestablish it there, right? So when we lack introspection, then we let the afflictions run rampant, like they run the show, if we're not actively paying attention to what's going on. And so if we're not doing the work of analyzing our own mind, that is like cashing in a ticket that's a one-way trip to the lower realms, right? Because we're letting our afflictions be the ones that motivate all of our actions. So instead of doing that, we need to then constantly cultivate mindfulness and introspection. And so when we notice that we've lost it, the first thing we should do, one of the ways we can recall it easily, is reminding ourselves, if I'm not doing this work of looking at my own mind, then the likelihood of following virtue is much less. And if I'm not following virtue, then I'm likely going to be following my afflictions. If I'm following my afflictions, then I'm creating non-virtue. If I'm creating non-virtue, I'm only setting myself up for greater suffering in this life and in all future lives. So having conviction in that and reminding yourself of that is then the motivation you need to exert greater effort in your mindfulness and in your alertness or introspection, right? So that's what this verse is calling us to do, is saying that developing conviction that a lack of mindfulness is going to cause us to proceed to the lower realms due to engaging in non-virtuous behavior. Once we have conviction in this, then we notice that lack of awareness or that lack of mindfulness. That conviction will then inspire us to redouble our efforts towards mindfulness and towards alertness. And that goes directly into the next two verses, which are talking about the external conditions to bring about greater introspection and the internal conditions. So the next verse is talking about the external conditions. So through staying in the company of spiritual masters, through the instructions of the abbots, and through fear, mindfulness will be easily generated in fortunate people who practice with respect. And then the next verse talks about the internal conditions. I am ever dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. By thinking in this way, I shall mindfully develop a sense of shame, respect, and fear. So this 2.5 verses are showing the external and the internal conditions that can help us develop minds of introspection and mindfulness to protect ourselves from non-virtue. And so in verse 30, it's saying that through staying in the company of my teachers, as well as my abbots and my preceptors, and through fear. So what do we mean by fear here? It's not fear of punishment, right? It's not fear of worldly punishment, but it is fear of the negative consequences of non-virtue. And it's also fear referencing shame and embarrassment, right? So here we understand shame and embarrassment. Shame and embarrassment are virtuous mental factors. If we understand the mind and its mental factors, shame and embarrassment are considered virtuous. And so we have to understand what we mean by them then, because the worldly understanding of shame and embarrassment, like, if I am standing up in front of a class and I'm embarrassed to read my report, that is not what we mean by embarrassment. Okay. So shame and embarrassment. Shame is avoiding misconduct due to your own disapproval of negative action or misconduct. And embarrassment is avoiding misconduct or avoiding negative deeds due to recognizing others' disapproval of those negative deeds. Right? So if I have conviction and understand that misconduct or negative actions cause suffering and I don't want to do them, then due to my own disapproval of negative of misconduct, I avoid it. That is what it means by shame, right? And in the same way, if I know that I'm in the presence of my teachers, especially, and that they would not approve of these behavior, then that prevents me from engaging in that behavior, right? I know that my teacher wouldn't approve of me taking a holiday and going to the beach, and therefore I don't do it. That is acting out of embarrassment. And so those are both virtuous. So we have to notice what the objects are that we are embarrassed or ashamed about. And embarrassment and shame are only focused on avoiding non-virtue, preventing ourselves from engaging in misconduct. So shame and embarrassment are preventative minds, right? The function of them is to restrain us from engaging in non-virtuous activity. If we engage in non-virtuous activity, then it's not shame or embarrassment that comes about. We should have regret. We should develop a mind that regrets engaging in non-virtue. So regret comes after our non-virtuous activity, and shame and embarrassment come before it to prevent us from doing non-virtue in the first place, right? So that's how they're different than worldly understanding of it. And the important thing, especially for us Westerners to understand, is that shame, embarrassment, and regret, none of them are guilt. Right? The Western understanding of guilt, saying you're a bad person because you did a bad thing. Or if you do a bad thing, that clearly makes you a bad person. Therefore, you should feel bad about yourself. That's not a useful emotion. And it doesn't have any basis in reality, right? Your action may have been harmful to yourself or to others. So you should regret that action. And you should strive not to ever repeat that action. That doesn't have any statement about you as a person. And so allowing yourself to feel guilty in the sense that I am such a bad person because I engaged in this non-virtue, that is not the same thing. The point of shame and embarrassment is to prevent us from engaging in non-virtue because we know that either it's an action we ourselves would disapprove of, or it's an action that others would disapprove of. And therefore, that prevents us from doing it. And if we do engage in that behavior, we develop regret. Now, an important distinction between shame, embarrassment, and regret is that shame and embarrassment are always virtuous. They're considered virtuous mental factors, so we should cultivate them because they prevent us from engaging in harmful activity. Regret is what is called a changeable mental factor. So it can be virtuous or non-virtuous, and it depends on the object of our regret. If we regret engaging in non-virtue, that mind of regret itself is virtuous. But if we regret engaging in virtue, then that mind of regret is non-virtuous. So regret is changeable. It can be virtuous or non-virtuous. So we should never regret engaging in virtuous behavior. As Madhvi, as we were talking earlier, right? If you make an offering to someone and you develop resentment afterwards, then you regret making that offering, then that is going to be, that regret itself is a type of non-virtue. But if you if you know that ahead of time, then you can do the work to not let that regret overwhelm you and you can still make the offering. If you have enough reflexivity and introspection that know that this is something that might come up. But the regret itself can go either way, whereas shame and embarrassment can't. So whenever we think of shame and embarrassment, we have to distinguish them from our worldly definition of those terms, right? I don't know if there are better terms we could use because there is definitely worldly embarrassment that we experience, right? Like when we make a fool of ourselves in front of large groups of people. That itself is not virtuous, right? So then we can inspect that and say, what is the utility of that emotion? Is that emotion preventing me from engaging in harmful action? Or is it just making me feel bad about myself? And if it's making me feel bad, is that doing anything useful? And most likely not. You know, maybe there are some circumstances where it is. It's encouraging you to study more or practice more like this. But we have to think of worldly understanding of shame and embarrassment and not conflate those with what we mean in a Dharma sense by shame and embarrassment. You know, an example, I've seen this as an analogy. I don't think it holds up 100%, but at least gives you a taste of what we mean by shame and embarrassment. So if there's a student who is studying and they're studying really hard because they want to succeed and they want to have a good outcome, then their motivation for that study is equivalent to shame because they are worried that if they don't study, they're not going to get a good job or good marks. If their motivation for studying is because they don't want to be punished by their parents for getting a bad grade, then that's like embarrassment. So the action of studying and doing the work to prepare themselves is either motivated by their own wish to succeed or their fear of others' disapproval. And in that way, you can see how shame and embarrassment are both pointing at the same thing, but one is trying to avoid your own disapproval and one is trying to avoid others' disapproval. I don't know if that analogy holds up 100%, but at least gives you a little bit of the flavor of how shame and embarrassment work, right? And that goes on to this next verse. So when we stay in the company of spiritual masters, of our teachers, and when we hear the instruction of our abbots, then we need to make sure that we develop our minds of shame and embarrassment. And we do so, the fear of engaging in non-virtue or the results of non-virtue. As a result of that, mindfulness is very easy, right? When we have shame and embarrassment, when we have a fear of the negative consequences of non-virtue, then that fuels our desire to generate mindfulness and introspection, right? So the mindfulness and introspection themselves help prevent us from engaging in non-virtuous activities, and having fear of the results of non-virtue encourage us to develop mindfulness and introspection. So as many things are in our Dharma practice, we see how they feed one another, right? The more we strengthen one area of our Dharma life, the stronger another area becomes. As that area gets strengthened, it reinforces the first. So nothing is isolated. Everything is working together towards this end of Buddhahood. So any practice we do, no matter how small, is pushing us towards Buddhahood. Any virtuous activity we do is going to affect all of our other types of spiritual activity. So there's no spiritual activity we can do that's too small. There's no virtuous activity. There's no virtuous mind. There's no beneficial process that we can engage in that is too small, because every single spiritual activity, every single moment of looking at our own mind is affecting our entire spiritual journey and our entire understanding of the path to Buddhahood, right? Everything reinforces itself, or reinforces each other rather. So nothing is too small. There's no virtuous activity that is below us or is beneath us. That's important to remember. And that should encourage us to do even small things. And now this next verse and a half is telling us the internal condition we can use. We remind ourselves of this. By thinking in such a way, I am ever dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are endowed with unobstructed vision. Reminding ourselves of that, that helps me develop a sense of shame, respect, and fear, right? So when you're around either your teachers or even just around, you recognize that we're always surrounded by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, whether or not we can see them with our regular sight. Developing conviction in that, it makes it much easier to develop a sense of shame, right? Because you don't want to engage in non-virtue. You actively want to avoid non-virtue because you don't want the disapproval of these holy beings or of your own self, right? Being around holy beings encourages better behavior. And the three objects here are respect. So you have respect for these realized beings, whether it's your teachers, your preceptors, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so recognizing that you're always in the presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas develops a constant sense of respect. And that respect encourages you to avoid non-virtue because you don't want to meet the disapproval of these holy beings who are always around you. And you fear the negative consequences of your non-virtuous actions. So reminding yourself, whether you're in the physical presence of your teachers or your preceptors or not, that you're constantly in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Reminding yourself of that that they are always with you. They're always working to benefit you in whatever ways you allow yourself to receive their benefit. Then that encourages you to develop minds of shame and embarrassment. And that shame and embarrassment then helps prevent you from engaging in non-virtue. And as a result, your introspection and your mindfulness increase and reinforce the minds of virtue and your virtuous activity. Does that make sense? Right? And then it says also through doing this, so reminding yourself, I am ever dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. Not only will that allow you to develop shame and embarrassment more easily, but also it will allow you to, the recollection of the Buddha will repeatedly occur. So your relationship with holy beings will become more intimate by constantly reminding yourself that I'm in the presence of Buddhas all the time. I may not see them. I may not have the ability to perceive them, but they're always there working for my benefit. And reminding yourself of that develops a more intimate relationship with holy beings and with the Dharma itself, because it makes you feel more connected. And the more connected you feel, you can take it as personal advice in a more meaningful way, right? As we've been advised. Every bit of Dharma is personal advice, but you can't take it that way if you don't develop an intimate relationship with the teachers, whether they be worldly teachers or the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So reminding yourself, using this verse, reminding yourself, I'm always dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. They are always endowed with unobstructed vision, right? Their vision is not obstructed by any of the afflicted minds. They don't have any ignorance that is blocking how they see things or how they perceive things, right? But reminding ourselves of that, we develop a more intimate relationship with holy beings and with the Dharma, and that allows us to take that Dharma as personal advice. By taking it as personal advice, we can live our lives in a way that is more in line with that Dharma more easily. It doesn't feel like an obstacle to overcome, but instead it feels like an aid that makes our lives more meaningful. So then these next two verses, which maybe we will end with today, then say they help us see how our introspection and how our ethical behavior arise from having that level of understanding. So verse 33 says, when mindfulness is set with the purpose of guarding the doorway of the mind, then alertness comes about naturally, and even that which you had lost is returned. And when, just as I am about to act, I see that my mind is tainted with defilement, at such a time I should remain immovable like a piece of wood. Right? Actually, maybe we'll leave this last verse for next week because there's a whole section on this. But we can go to verse 33, which is a saying that when we work to develop mindfulness, which is the mind that is always keeping close attention to what to adopt and what to abandon, the mind that is constantly remembering this is virtue, this is non-virtue. As we develop that and we recognize that as being the doorway to all of our behavior, then alertness comes about naturally. And that alertness that we'd lost is restored and new levels of alertness are developed, right? So that's how these work hand in hand. You know, the word for mindfulness in Tibetan is drenpa, and Sanskrit it's smrti. It's the same word for memory, for memorization, right? So a memory is a mind of, we say dren she, shepa is a mind, right? So dren she is a memory, where drenpa is mindfulness. So mindfulness isn't just awareness. It is actually remembering what it is that you're focused on. And in this case, we're focused on virtue, focused on distinguishing what to adopt and what to abandon in our behavior and in our mental attitudes. So that's what we mean by mindfulness, not just the non-objective awareness of everything going on around you. That's not what we mean by mindfulness. We mean actually remembering the object that we are putting our mind towards. And in this case, it is remembering virtue. Maybe that's a good place to end. Let's maybe have time for some questions.
Yes, Venerable, if I may.
Yes.
During some meditation sessions, I'm trying to go deeper in my mindfulness and our alertness. And I start to realize there are lots of cultural and questions related to family issues and what we call psychological mind we have developed. And I wonder, and I start to realize there are lots of different layers regarding my mind. what is in the surface is the way I behave here in our culture, our community. But I start to realize there are lots of different layers, and when I go deep, I think it's hard to be in touch with this so precious minds. It's like a treasure, really, really deep in, and I wonder if there is some different practice from all the practice we know in the books, but some different. I mean, I practice so I can get more deep in my mind.
Yeah.
Different from the common practice we know.
Well, the experience that you are sharing is very common, right? And the truth is, all the practices build on one another. So engaging in even mindfulness practice, right? You're going to notice levels of anxiety and disturbance and distraction that are very surface level. And then the more you meditate, you're going to notice deeper levels of distraction. And the only way to overcome those deeper levels is to work there slowly. So there's no fast track. I can't say meditate on this one thing and you're going to go right to the heart of it. You have to go layer by layer. And a very common experience, even just doing single point of concentration, like say just following the breath, that simple of a practice. A very common experience is you're meditating for some time, right? For maybe a few months or a few years. And as you meditate, you feel more confident in your meditation. You notice there are fewer and fewer distractions. You're able to stay focused for longer without being overwhelmed by either external or internal distractions. So you feel like you're making progress, right? And then all of a sudden, all of that seems to go away. And you sit down and meditate and you feel like you're more disturbed than ever before, that you have more obstacles than ever before. And what usually happens is all those distractions have always been there, but they're so subtle, you weren't even realizing that those distractions were running around in your mind. But as you progress in your practice, you've broken through the surface layer and you've gotten to a deeper layer that you have more work to do. So your practice itself can feel like it's improving and then it takes a dip. But the truth is, that is just getting to a deeper layer where you have more subtle distractions that you need to overcome, right? So that's a very common experience, is that you have the outer layer and then you have an inner layer and then maybe even a deeper layer after that. And so the only way to really touch the heart of your mind is to go slowly through all those practices. If you don't get rid of the coarse external practices, distractions, then how can you get to the core ones, right? You need to go through all of them. There are other types of meditation, though, that may be more useful and for depending on your mind and where your practice is. So even just trying to understand the mind, there are types of meditation where we think of the mind as an ocean and we meditate on the mind like an ocean. There are other meditations where we meditate on the mind like the sky, right? And so those types of practice might help for your personal disposition cut to a deeper level than the other surface levels are. So you can look at different types of meditation practice and see there within our tradition, there are many different types. And it isn't that one is better than another, but some people, due to our circumstances or due to our dispositions, one might be more meaningful or more effective than another. And so you can try different types of way of analyzing your mind and doing practice like that, but also have confidence that it's very common to have different levels of distraction. They start with the coarsest, and those may be the ones that are affected by the outside world, by your culture, by your environment. And then they get deeper and deeper to more subtle psychological difficulties. And you're not going to start with those most subtle, like when you're washing a stain out of a cloth. The first is like when you have a stain, there's some stain that just gets away just by rinsing it. And then there's another part of the stain where you have to actually scrub it, right? So you have to start by getting rid of the excess debris. That's our coarse distractions. And then slowly, slowly, we get to the calm stillness of our mind that takes a while to get to.
Okay, sometimes I think the meditation is not working. I change the environment or change the objects or change anything to go deeper. But I think time
You
makes
can
it different.
sometimes. I mean, it's worth looking, right? Like sometimes it may be that like this environment is really difficult for my meditation, and therefore I should try a different environment. So that is possible, but you shouldn't make that your first thing, right? Because then it's just easy to say, if I don't have perfect conditions, I'm not going to be able to meditate. And so instead of actually looking at your mind, you're allowing yourself to run around in circles and find different conditions. So it is possible, but you should always exert a decent amount of effort with whatever the conditions are. And if it's still not working, you're still hitting more obstacles, then you say, okay, maybe try to change one of the external conditions and see how that affects things, right? But don't be constantly changing over and over and over again. Do it slowly. And then you can analyze, is it my mind that's the obstacle, or am I really experiencing an external obstacle? And you try to work through it that way, you know. So it's worth doing that work. And it is true that sometimes there are external obstacles that it's easier to avoid at this part of our practice. But don't jump there right away. Start with doing the internal work, and then slowly, you know, one piece at a time, you can try to change things.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Venerable, I have a follow-up question on verse 31, who is speaking. The second
Okay.
half, which says, who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. Is this just a reference to the enlightened qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or does it have any specific purpose in this context stating this here?
Here it is just referencing the enlightened qualities of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then also by proxy, our spiritual masters and our abbots and preceptors, right? So that's the main context here.
Okay, I have a question, Venerable. Thank you for today's session.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Actually, I'm riding my bike. That's okay. I'm on my earphone. So my question is, we have the Four Noble Truths, right? You
Yes.
connecting to that example you gave about the studies we choose because of either parents or this. So we have that like samsara is suffering, right? And also, can you add light, like how do we overcome that suffering with today's practice?
I mean, how to overcome suffering is the whole point of our spiritual path, right? So the whole purpose of our practice, it's a big question. Though if we're relating it specifically to what we're talking about today, is we recognize that the coarse forms of our suffering, our external suffering, our gross suffering, our suffering of pain, our suffering of like coarse levels of emotional discomfort, those are things that are really hard to avoid because we are samsaric beings. So as samsaric beings, we're subject to the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. We can't avoid those things. What we can avoid is how we react to those experiences and whether we create more mental and emotional suffering on top of those experiences or not, right? And so if we want to be free from suffering, we need to make sure our mind is not clinging to external experiences as if that was true happiness or true suffering. And instead, we have to recognize that our happiness and our suffering actually come from our mind, not from the external conditions. And by doing that, then once we have conviction in that, that is what propels us to always seek out virtue and to avoid non-virtue, because you recognize that non-virtue is what is causing our experiences of suffering, and we don't want to continue having them. And then the way we do that is by developing mindfulness and alertness to guard our mind, to make sure our mind isn't seeking out non-virtue, it isn't seeking out self-cherishing, it isn't seeking out worldly pleasure only, but is instead seeking out a spiritual happiness that is much greater than any samsaric happiness we could ever achieve. But the truth is we have to have conviction. And this is like the core heart of the Buddhist philosophical project and of the Buddhist soteriological project even, is that our happiness and our suffering come from our mind. They don't come from the environment around us. The environment around us might create the conditions that make it easier to experience happiness or easier to experience suffering, but our actual mind is what determines whether we experience joy or displeasure, right? And whether we are clinging to external things or whether we are clinging to our mind, right?
Yeah, thank you, Venerable. Yeah, thank you.
So our teaching today on introspection and awareness, like I mentioned earlier, these are neutral mental factors. They, in and of themselves, are not virtuous or non-virtuous. But when we use them to point towards virtue, then they become virtuous activities that make all of our practices in line with the Dharma. And then they make all of our activities causes of happiness and joy in this life and in future lives. Right? But you can meditate, you can be mindful and meditate on non-virtue, right? There are people that are angry all the time. They definitely have minds that are meditating on anger. That's definitely possible. I know I've had moments where someone has, insulted me or hurt me in some way, and I just spend so much time thinking about wanting to get back at them. Like, how many times have you just sat and thought, oh, I know the perfect thing I could have said, and your whole mind is occupied by thinking of how you could have hurt someone or how you could have gotten back to them and shown that you were better than them. That's meditating on non-virtue. We do it all the time, or at least I do it all the time. I don't know about you, right? But so it's possible to use your mind in non-virtuous ways. And the mindfulness and alertness are only useful when we recognize that they need to be pointed towards virtue. So we have to have some understanding of what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous, what is leading towards Buddhahood and what is leading towards suffering. That is where we have to have study, and we have to have contemplation that analyzes our study and develops conviction. And then we use our meditation practice to strengthen our minds to always point towards virtue. So all these things have to work together in this way. Mindfulness and alertness on their own are neutral, but we have to strengthen them and then point them towards virtue.
Venerable, is there time for one question from me?
Let's do one more question. Sure.
Okay. So you spoke earlier about when we feel threatened, when Priyanka asked about feeling physically threatened. But you also mentioned feeling emotionally threatened. So how does one use mindfulness and alertness when one is feeling emotionally threatened in order to not act in a non-virtuous way?
I mean, it's the same, right? So when you notice, if I notice I'm feeling emotionally threatened, due to, I mean, you can think of many examples, right? So instead of giving a specific, I'll say, if I notice I'm feeling emotionally threatened, if I have mindfulness and alertness, that they are aware of that, then I see, am I reacting to this threat because I want to preserve my sense of self-dignity, because I want to preserve my reputation, I want to preserve my worldly happiness, or am I reacting to this threat because I want to engage in a virtuous activity, whatever it may be, right? So it depends. You have to give a specific example to give you a specific answer, but it's all about looking at your motivation. So the introspection and mindfulness are just noticing what is motivating my behavior. And when I experience this threat, what is being threatened? Is my self-cherishing mind being threatened, or is there something else being threatened? And if there's something else being threatened, then what is the appropriate response that is in line with Dharma and is not in line with my reactionary emotions? You know?
So in case of when you're feeling emotionally threatened, is it safe to assume that it is mostly my self-cherishing mind that is being threatened, right? Because I mean, I'm not in any physical threat. So then it probably is my self-cherishing mind that is that a safe assumption to make?
It's safe to presume that most of the time that's what it's going to be. And that through introspection and awareness, you can become confident of that. There may be counter examples. So I don't want to give you like 100%, but it's safe to say that most likely when I'm feeling emotionally threatened, it's because my self-cherishing mind, my image, my wish for my own immediate happiness and satisfaction, that is what is being threatened. And therefore, it is self-cherishing that is being threatened. So that's true. You can presume that most of the time, an emotional threat is going to be that, but maybe not 100% of the time. So you have to, I don't want to give you any black and white answer in that way, but that's a safe starting point for introspection.
Right. So then if I'm able to conclude that it is self-cherishing, so then I say that this is an excellent opportunity for me to address myself. Is that the way to deal with it then?
Most of the time, it depends on the circumstance. So if I'm at my job and my boss is insulting me in front of all my coworkers, right? Then I experience his insult and his critique. Now, my self-cherishing mind doesn't want to be insulted. And so it's my self-cherishing mind that is really upset by this. But then once I realize that, I might notice being insulted in front of my coworkers is not beneficial to my livelihood, and it creates obstacles to me existing in this workplace. So therefore, maybe I do have to respond to these insults or these critiques or whatever they may be, but I'm not doing it because I care about my reputation for personal or worldly reasons, but I'm trying to do it with the motivation that if I want to succeed in my life and create the conditions where I can continue to practice and lead a meaningful life, then I need to negotiate the situation in a meaningful way. So you sometimes still have to take external action to stop that external threat, that emotional threat. But you realize that the real danger is if you give into your self-cherishing. So do you see what I mean? So depending on how you work with it, it might depend on the environment and what the specific circumstances are. Sometimes you might just say, okay, I'll let them insult me and I'll work on my own self-cherishing mind. I don't have to do anything externally. And that is most useful. But sometimes if you live in the world, you have to balance living in the world and how you can negotiate these spiritual practice, right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave it there because we're running late, or we're running right on time, which is very uncommon. So if there are any more questions, of course, you can save them to next week, or you can email me if they're urgent. I'm happy to answer questions that way. But let's take a moment now to just recognize that through our study and our practice today, we have accumulated some merit, some good karma. And instead of hoarding that for ourselves, we develop a mind that wishes to give that merit away, to dedicate that merit to other sentient beings. We develop the wish that that merit might ripen on others, that others' suffering may be relieved through the experience and the ripening of our good karma. And especially that that good karma might ripen in our quick achievement of Buddhahood, so that we might be a maximum service to others. So we dedicate our merit in that way. And we'll offer just a few closing dedication prayers. This first one we'll offer once in Tibetan and then in English, and then the next verses we will do in English. Choe Sum Ling Ma Kye Pa Nam Kye Gyo Chik Kye Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gon Ne Gon De Pel Wa Shok. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equaling the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate all of you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for spending
so
your
much,
morning with us.
Venerable. Thank you so much for a wonderful day of teachings. And we'll see all of you next week in person at the center. We will also be online. Can you all please stand up for prostrations? We'll end the session today with prostrations. Thank you. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you, everyone.